If this story moved you, subscribe for more human stories from the stars.
They didn't invite the human to speak. They invited the human to wait. That alone should tell you how afraid the galaxy already was. The Deathworld Council chamber floated in silence, a ring of species that had survived planets designed to kill them. Acid oceans, crushing gravity, skies that rained metal. Each delegate bore scars of evolution and war. And yet, every one of them kept glancing at the same empty chair. Not the throne at the center, not the holographic battlefield hovering above the floor. The standby seat. It was smaller than the others. No ceremonial markings, no insignia. Just a simple, human-made alloy chair, bolted directly to the floor, as if someone once feared it might be thrown. Or used. No one spoke of why it existed, not officially. But every species in that room knew the rule. If the standby light turns green, the council is already too late. The counselors argued anyway. They always did. This dispute does not warrant escalation, hissed the Zalrith envoy, mandibles clicking in agitation. The Vornath crossed a border moon, nothing more. Nothing more, the stone-skinned Celt rumbled. They sterilized the biosphere in under an hour. Murmurs spread, tension tightened. The hologram flickered, showing a once-living world reduced to gray silence. Still, no one touched the standby console, because once you involve a human, you don't end a conflict, you redefine it. At the far edge of the chamber, beyond the circle of power, a single figure stood behind transparent shielding. No armor, no weapons visible, just a human in a dark uniform, hands calmly folded behind their back. Commander Elias Rowe, Earth Defense Coalition. Status: on standby. He had been there for 6 hours, motionless, patient. That scared them more than any war fleet ever had. Humans were not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the longest lived, but they came from a world classified as a Category 15 death world, a planet where survival itself was a daily act of defiance. Predators everywhere, diseases that adapted faster than medicine, natural disasters that erased cities overnight. And humans? They didn't just survive it, they evolved to end threats. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. The standby console flickered. Yellow. Not green, not yet. But every counselor froze, knowing what came next if diplomacy failed. Because the moment that light turned green, the human wouldn't ask for permission. He'd ask only one question. Who do you want left standing? The yellow light meant one thing. Time was running out. Across the chamber, voices lowered, not out of respect, but fear, because the Deathworld Council had only ever seen the standby light turn yellow twice in its entire existence. Both times, entire star systems were later marked uninhabitable. Commander Elias Rowe didn't move. He didn't look at the light. Humans learned long ago that staring at a countdown only made it louder in your head. Instead, he watched the counselors, their breathing patterns, the subtle shifts in posture, the tells of creatures who knew they were losing control. The Celt delegate leaned forward, stone fingers grinding together. We cannot allow the Vornath to believe extermination carries no consequence. And we cannot unleash them every time someone panics, snapped the avian crow reeve, feathers bristling. Humans escalate. They always escalate. Rowe almost smiled. That was the lie the galaxy told itself. Humans didn't escalate first. They simply finished things. The hologram shifted again. New data streamed in, fresh, urgent, impossible to ignore. A second world, then a third. Vornath fleet movings faster than projected. No warnings, no declarations, just silence, followed by planetary death. The council chamber erupted. "This is genocide! They're testing our response. If we don't act now, they'll—" A heavy clang cut through the noise. The standby console pulsed, yellow to amber, one step from green. Several counselors flinched instinctively, backs pressing into their seats. One species, the thin-limbed Sarathi, actually recoiled from the human's direction, as if proximity alone invited catastrophe. Still, no one spoke the command, because activating a human meant surrendering the illusion of control. The Crow Reeve turned toward Ro at last. "Commander," it said carefully, "if, hypothetically, we were to authorize limited involvement." Ro raised one finger, just one. The chamber went silent. "I need to be clear," he said, voice calm, almost gentle. "There is no limited once I'm activated." Murmurs, fear, anger. Ro continued, unfazed. "You brought me here because your simulations failed, because every species in this room tried mercy, deterrence, sanctions, blockades." He stepped closer to the barrier. "You don't keep humans on standby because we're cruel." The amber light brightened. "You keep us because when something threatens everything, we are willing to become the monster so no one else has to." A new alert flashed red across the hologram. Vornath fleet entering Council-protected space. That wasn't a warning. That was a declaration. The standby console chimed again, one final tone. The light hovered on the edge of green, and every counselor knew the next decision would echo for centuries.
No one voted. They never did at this stage. The Deathworld Council had learned the hard way that when extinction-level events approached, democracy became a luxury species didn't survive long enough to enjoy. The standby console made the decision for them. Green. The light didn't flash, it didn't pulse, it simply turned on, steady and absolute, like a verdict already delivered. The transparent barrier around Commander Elias Rowe dissolved with a soft hiss. For the first time since entering the chamber, the human moved. Not quickly, not dramatically. He rolled his shoulders once, like someone preparing for a long walk, and stepped forward into the circle of power. Every counselor instinctively leaned back as he passed, as though gravity itself had shifted toward him. "Authorization confirmed," the chamber's ancient AI announced. "Human strategic asset active." The words sent a chill through the room. Asset. That was what they called him when they were afraid to say weapon. Rowe stopped beside the central holo projector. The image changed automatically, recognizing his biosignature. Star maps expanded. Vornath-controlled regions glowed a hostile crimson. "Before I begin," Rowe said, "you should understand something." The council listened. They always listened once it was too late. "You're not asking me to win a war. You're asking me to end a pattern." With a gesture, Rowe pulled up archived data, centuries of Vornath behavior, expansion, testing borders, overwhelming retaliation against weaker neighbors, strategic annihilation masked as security operations. "They don't fear you, they fear inconvenience." Silence thickened. "So we're going to teach them fear again." Several counselors protested at once. "This violates interstellar law, the Accords." Rowe cut them off with two words, "Already broken." He highlighted the first sterilized world, then the second, then the third. "By the time your lawyers finish arguing," he said quietly, "there won't be anyone left to protect." The holo zoomed in on a Vornath command nexus, a fortress station bristling with weapons, buried deep in their territory. "This is where we start," Rowe said. A ripple of shock moved through the chamber. "That's their core," the Sarathi delegate squealed. "An attack there would collapse their command structure." "Yes." The Crow Reeve swallowed. "And how many lives will that cost?" Rowe didn't hesitate. "Fewer than letting them continue." That was the human difference. Not bloodlust. Math. The chamber AI hesitated. Council confirmation required for preemptive decapitation strike. All eyes turned back to the counselors. They hesitated, just for a moment, because once they confirmed this, there was no going back, no apologies, no ceasefires, no half measures. Rowe waited, patient, deadly. The Celt delegate raised one massive hand. Authorize, it rumbled. One by one, others followed. The AI chimed. Council confirmation complete. Rowe exhaled slowly. Then he smiled, and that terrified them most of all.
They didn't invite the human to speak. They invited the human to wait. That alone should tell you how afraid the galaxy already was. The Deathworld Council chamber floated in silence, a ring of species that had survived planets designed to kill them. Acid oceans, crushing gravity, skies that rained metal. Each delegate bore scars of evolution and war. And yet, every one of them kept glancing at the same empty chair. Not the throne at the center, not the holographic battlefield hovering above the floor. The standby seat. It was smaller than the others. No ceremonial markings, no insignia. Just a simple, human-made alloy chair, bolted directly to the floor, as if someone once feared it might be thrown. Or used. No one spoke of why it existed, not officially. But every species in that room knew the rule. If the standby light turns green, the council is already too late. The counselors argued anyway. They always did. This dispute does not warrant escalation, hissed the Zalrith envoy, mandibles clicking in agitation. The Vornath crossed a border moon, nothing more. Nothing more, the stone-skinned Celt rumbled. They sterilized the biosphere in under an hour. Murmurs spread, tension tightened. The hologram flickered, showing a once-living world reduced to gray silence. Still, no one touched the standby console, because once you involve a human, you don't end a conflict, you redefine it. At the far edge of the chamber, beyond the circle of power, a single figure stood behind transparent shielding. No armor, no weapons visible, just a human in a dark uniform, hands calmly folded behind their back. Commander Elias Rowe, Earth Defense Coalition. Status: on standby. He had been there for 6 hours, motionless, patient. That scared them more than any war fleet ever had. Humans were not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the longest lived, but they came from a world classified as a Category 15 death world, a planet where survival itself was a daily act of defiance. Predators everywhere, diseases that adapted faster than medicine, natural disasters that erased cities overnight. And humans? They didn't just survive it. They evolved to end threats. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. The standby console flickered. Yellow. Not green. Not yet. But every counselor froze, knowing what came next if diplomacy failed. Because the moment that light turned green, the human wouldn't ask for permission. He'd ask only one question. Who do you want left standing? The Vornath didn't surrender. That was their final mistake. Within minutes of the broadcast, fractured Vornath fleets began regrouping, not strategically, desperately. Local commanders, stripped of central control, defaulted to doctrine burned into them since hatching. Overwhelm, exterminate, advance. To the Deathworld Council, it looked like defiance. To Elias Rowe, it looked like predictability. Phase 4, he said softly. The human ship didn't move. Space around it did. across 3 contested systems, human stealth buoys, placed decades earlier, long before the Vornath ever became a threat, activated simultaneously. Ancient relics of quiet preparation, dismissed by most species as paranoia. Each buoy unfolded into something far more dangerous than a weapon, a signal. Vornath's ships began reporting sensor anomalies, enemy fleets where there were none, safe corridors turning lethal without warning. Their crews watched reality betray them as human-crafted false data overrode targeting logic and navigation instincts. They fired on shadows, they rammed allies, they fled into gravity wells that tore them apart. The Council watched the chaos unfold in real time. "This is cruel," murmured one delegate. Rowe heard it through the open channel. "No," he replied. "Cruel would be letting them learn slowly." Then came the counterstroke. A surviving Vornath war group managed to break through the confusion and accelerate toward a populated Council-aligned system. Billions of civilians, no defenses strong enough to stop a full assault. Alarm screamed in the chamber. "This is it," the Sarathi cried. "We've lost control." Rowe's eyes hardened. "No," he said. "Now you see it." He issued a single command. From a nearby star, something woke up. Human stellar engineering, classified, theoretical, forbidden by every known treaty, adjusted the star's output by a fraction of a percent. To most species, that number meant nothing. To orbital mechanics, it meant everything. The attacking Vornath fleet found its jump exits subtly altered. Their ships emerged too close, way too close. Gravity crushed hulls like paper. Radiation flayed crews alive. The star didn't explode. It didn't need to. It simply reminded everyone who truly understood the universe. The system was saved. Silence swallowed the council chamber. "Humans can do that?" someone whispered. Rowe didn't answer. He was already looking ahead. Because the Vornath hadn't learned fear yet. They were still angry, and anger made them reckless, exactly as planned.
Anger spread through the Vornath like a wildfire. And just like any wildfire, it consumed oxygen faster than it created progress. Scattered Vornath commanders began broadcasting threats, raw, emotional, uncoordinated. Promises of vengeance, declarations of eternal war. They blamed the Council, they blamed the humans, they blamed the universe itself. Rowe watched every transmission. Humans were good at many things. Listening was one of them. "Phase 5, he said. This phase wasn't about ships. It was about memory. Across the Vornath homeworlds, archives began unlocking. Files long buried by their own regime. Records of first contact massacres, of species erased before they could even name themselves, of internal purges framed as necessary sacrifices. Rowe didn't leak lies. He leaked truth, the kind that destabilized civilizations. On Vornath streets, protests erupted. Military loyalty fractured as younger officers questioned orders they'd never been allowed to question before. Entire battalions refused deployment, not out of mercy, but doubt. The Deathworld Council watched in stunned silence. "He's turning their own people against them," the Crow Reeve said. "No," Rowe corrected calmly. "They already did that. I'm just letting them notice." Then came the bait. A human task force, small, visible, deliberately vulnerable, appeared at the edge of Vornath space. Transponders blazing, shields low, a challenge wrapped in arrogance. The Vornath took it. Every remaining heavy unit converged, hungry for revenge, desperate for a win they could broadcast. Rowe allowed himself one breath. "Now," he whispered. The task force retreated toward a dead system,
a place the Council had abandoned centuries ago after something went wrong with an experimental gravity project. The Vornath pursued without hesitation. The moment their fleets crossed the boundary, dormant structures awakened. Invisible gravity wells snapped into place, locking ships into impossible orbits. Engines screamed, hulls buckled. The trap closed. Rowe addressed them one last time. "You could have stopped," he said over open channels. "You chose momentum instead." Then he cut the feed. The gravity wells intensified. Not enough to kill them quickly, enough to make escape impossible. The message was clear. This wasn't extermination. This was containment. And to a species built on conquest, being unable to advance was a fate worse than death. Back in the council chamber, someone finally asked the question everyone feared. "Commander, what happens when they beg?" Rowe's expression didn't change. "They won't, not yet." He turned back to the stars, because the final lesson hadn't been delivered. The begging didn't come. What came instead was silence. Entire Vornath regions went dark. No broadcasts, no threats, no defiance. Just the quiet collapse of an empire that had only ever known forward motion. Silence to most species meant uncertainty. To humans, it meant something had broken. Rowe leaned forward, studying the data streams. "They're consolidating," he said, "internally." On Vornath worlds, power structures imploded. Civil authorities blamed military commanders. Military commanders blamed dead leaders. Old rival clans resurfaced, each claiming they alone could restore dominance. The galaxy watched a predator species turn on itself. The Deathworld Council was uneasy. "This is destabilizing the region," argued one delegate. "Refugee flows, economic shockwaves. We didn't authorize regime collapse." Rowe finally turned back to them. "No," he said quietly. "You authorized survival." A new signal cut through the noise. An encrypted Vornath transmission, narrowband, cautious, routed through a dozen intermediaries. Not a surrender, a request. The chamber AI translated it aloud. "Proposed dialogue, conditions, neutral ground, no human presence." Several counselors exhaled in relief. Rowe did not. "They're testing boundaries," he said, "seeing if fear still works." The crow reeve tilted its head. "And if we accept?" Rowe's gaze hardened. "Then everything we did becomes a warning shot, and warnings only teach one lesson, that you can be ignored." He stepped closer to the standby console again, not to activate it, to remind them it existed. Humans don't stay. We arrive, we solve the problem, then we leave behind a universe that remembers why it shouldn't make us come back. The council hesitated. Again, because this time the enemy wasn't advancing, they were waiting. Finally, the Helt delegate spoke. "What do you propose?" Rowe inhaled. "We meet them on their terms." Gasps echoed. "But with one condition." He raised a single finger. "I speak." The neutral meeting site was chosen, a barren moon, atmosphereless, empty. Vornath envoys arrived first, armored and nervous. Then a single human shuttle landed. No escort, no weapons visible. Rowe stepped out alone. The Vornath delegation stared, uncertain, confused. They expected rage. They expected threats. Rowe gave them neither. He looked at them like a teacher facing students who had failed the final exam, and then he asked the question that would decide the fate of their species. "Do you want to exist," he said calmly, "or do you want to be remembered?"
The Vornath envoys didn't answer right away. Their species had never been asked a question like that. Existence, to them, meant dominance, expansion, proof of superiority written across conquered stars. Memory was something imposed on others, history books authored by the winners. Ro let the silence stretch. Humans understood the power of discomfort. Finally, the tallest envoy spoke, voice rigid. "We do not fear extinction." Ro nodded once. "I know. That's why you're losing." A ripple of anger passed through the group. Claws flexed, armor plates shifted. Ro didn't move. "You believe fear is weakness," he continued, "but fear is information. It tells you where the edge is. You crossed it." One envoy hissed, "You trapped our fleets, broke our command, turned our people against us. What more do you want?" Ro's eyes narrowed, not in hatred, but in focus, in understanding. He activated a small projector, no weapons, no threats, just images. Worlds erased by Vornath advance, species names translated, then grayed out, extinct. Children's silhouettes fossilized into glassed cities, signals that ended mid-scream. The envoys recoiled. "This is propaganda." "No," Ro said softly. "This is accounting." He stepped closer. "You see yourselves as inevitable, as natural forces, predators." He met their gaze. "So are we." The words settled like a weight. "But predators," Ro went on, "who learned something yours never did." He deactivated the images. "When prey disappears," he said, "the ecosystem collapses, and eventually the predator starves." The envoys exchanged uneasy glances. "You are not being punished," Ro said. "You are being contained, given a chance to stop before the universe stops you." One envoy's voice cracked. "And if we refuse?" Ro didn't raise his voice. "Then the gravity wells stay on. Your fleets remain frozen. Your borders shrink. Your children grow up knowing only decline." He leaned in. No explosions, no glorious last stand, just irrelevance. That terrified them, because legacy mattered to conquerors. Ro straightened. "So, I'll ask again." A long pause. Then, slowly, one envoy removed their helmet. "We wish to exist." Ro exhaled. "Then listen carefully," he said, "because this is the only mercy you will receive." "Existence," Ro said, "comes with conditions." The Vornath envoys stiffened. They had expected terms. What unsettled them was the absence of triumph in his voice. No victory, no satisfaction, just certainty. "You will withdraw from every occupied system beyond your original borders," Ro continued. "Not negotiate, not delay, withdraw." One envoy snarled, "That would dismantle our empire." Ro nodded. "Yes." The word landed heavier than any threat. "You will dismantle your extermination fleets," he went on. "Open your archives, submit your historical records to the Council without alteration. Every species you erased will be remembered." Another envoy trembled. "You're asking us to accept humiliation." Ro met its gaze. "I'm offering you survival." He gestured toward the stars above the barren moon. "Your people believe power comes from taking. Humans learn something different." The envoys waited. "Power," Ro said, "comes from restraint." That was the most alien concept they had heard yet. "You will rebuild the worlds you can. Where you can't, you will fund restoration. Where life is gone forever, you will protect what remains elsewhere. Not because you are forgiven," he paused, "but because you are watched." The gravity of that sank in slowly.
The tallest envoy finally asked, "And you? What do humans gain from this?" Ro was quiet for a long moment. "Nothing," he said. The envoys blinked. "No territory, no tribute, no praise," Ro went on. "Humans don't need your resources. We don't need your fear." He looked back toward the distant pinprick of Earth's sun. "We need a universe stable enough that we don't have to keep showing up." That frightened them more than any ultimatum, because it meant this wasn't about revenge. It was about maintenance. A chime sounded in Ro's ear, council confirmation, reluctant, uneasy, but unanimous. The gravity wells around trapped Vornath fleets powered down by a single increment, not enough to free them, enough to prove the humans' control was absolute. "This is your chance," he said. "Take it, and your species survives long enough to redefine itself." He turned back toward his shuttle. "Refuse," he added without looking back, "and the council won't call me again." The envoys understood the implication. There would be no second warning, no escalation, just an empty space where the Vornath used to be. As Ro boarded the shuttle, one envoy spoke quietly. "We will comply." Ro paused at the threshold. "Good," he said, "because the last lesson is already spreading." Behind him, across the galaxy, species were watching and learning. The war didn't end with a celebration. It ended with paperwork. Withdrawals logged, fleets dismantled under neutral supervision, archives released, raw, unedited, devastating. Across the galaxy, species learned the names of worlds that had never made it into history books. The Vornath didn't vanish, they shrank, and for the first time in their recorded existence, they stopped expanding. The Deathworld Council reconvened weeks later. The standby chair was still there, unchanged, unoccupied. Some counselors wanted it removed. They were overruled, because deterrence only works if the threat remains visible. Commander Elias Ro stood once more at the edge of the chamber, status returning to standby. No applause followed. No thanks. That was fine. The Crow Reeve finally broke the silence. "The galaxy will remember this as a human victory." Ro shook his head. "No, they'll remember it as a pause." He looked around the chamber. "You didn't solve war. You just reminded everyone what the cost looks like when things go too far." The Kelk delegate rumbled. "And if another species crosses that line?" Ro's gaze flicked briefly to the standby console. "Then you already know what to do." The light remained off. Across the galaxy, borders stabilized. Former aggressors hesitated. Simulations were rewritten. One variable was added to every strategic model. Human response probability, non-zero. And that changed everything. On Earth, no parades were held, no monuments built. Most humans never knew how close the galaxy had come to catastrophe. They went to work, raised families, argued about trivial things. That was the point. Because humanity didn't see itself as a ruler of the stars, just a reminder. A reminder that even in a universe of monsters, there was always something worse waiting. Not to conquer, but to stop you. The standby chair sat in silence, and the galaxy breathed easier, knowing it was there.